To Somalia now, where fear of prosecution under UK and US counter-terror laws is hindering those trying to provide humanitarian assistance in areas held by Islamist militants. And this is according to media reports. CGTN's Abdulaziz Billow reports from Mogadishu on what this means for Somalia's protracted humanitarian crisis.
Barely a month after US President Donald Trump made Al-Shabaab a target, experts are sounding a possible alarm over increased civilian casualties as the country battles a ravaging drought that's threatening more than half of Somalia's population. Trump has relaxed some of the rules for preventing civilian casualties when the American military carries out counter-terrorism strikes in Somalia.
Wrong direction, wrong operation, wrong location will eventually take place, and it's the civilian population that has to bear the brunt of that. If Western powers expand their scope of operation, then definitely we are talking about increased civilian casualties. The US has relaxed its strict war policy, and it's not good for us at all.
Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda affiliated militant group continues to be a major impediment to United Nations and Western aid agencies. It has also blockaded several regions. There is also growing fear among some Western-based aid organizations whose tough counter-terror laws hinders those trying to provide aid in Al-Shabaab-held areas. Security experts say Western countries must come clear in their approach. The government in Mogadishu also says that its main priority is to save lives.
It's the UK and the US who want to turn Somalia into a battlefield. It's the Western countries that provide the aid and at the same time seek to enforce its anti-terrorism laws on its own aid agencies. As Somalis, we don't want to be victims, and we don't want to be caught up in this conflict.
The bulk of the work has been left to UN and Somali charity organizations that have so far assisted more than 1.7 million people most vulnerable in Somalia. China also recently donated $10 million to the UN WFP as part of its Somalia aid package, and one that will go a long way in addressing the drought crisis.
Somalia is a country of multiple challenges, but it is also a country where we see multiple opportunities arising. We have supported Somalia most food insecure, most vulnerable with a number of options. We have supported them with cash-based assistance through an electronic solution which allows Somalis to receive funds on electronic card payments the same way as in any other country.
In some of the worst drought-affected regions of the country, rainfall has been recorded over the past few days, but experts are of the view that that will not create an immediate impact. On one hand, the UN is calling for an increased aid assistance for Somalia, as Mogadishu is planning a major offensive against the Al-Shabaab. And with no end in sight to the ongoing drought crisis, experts fear that the crisis will only worsen unless there's a change in the current approach. Abdulaziz, Billow, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, let's cross over to Abdulaziz now in Mogadishu. Abdulaziz, give us a bit more clarity, though, and help us understand why the UK and US counter-terror laws have jurisdiction in Somalia exactly.
Well, Beatrice, the UK and the US, they are among Somalia's strategic partners here in terms of security and humanitarian-wise. So the US and the UK are leading in Somalia's counter-terrorism operation against the Al-Shabaab, and most recently also the US President Donald Trump relaxed some of the rules of engagement, meaning that the American military will have more jurisdiction here in Somalia in its counter-terrorism operation. So definitely that's one of the main reasons as to why the jurisdiction, or the counter-terrorism law rather, also applies here in Somalia, because it's also leading the humanitarian efforts here in Somalia. Both the UK and the US are leading the humanitarian efforts here in Somalia. So experts are of the view that Western aid agencies don't want to be caught up. They're rather caught up in between a rock and a hard place. On one end, they don't want to be seen as that they're contradicting their government here by supporting the armed group through channeling of aid to drought-stricken victims in areas controlled by the Al-Shabaab. They don't want to fall victim to the counter-terrorism operation back home there, and they don't want eventually their licenses to be revoked by the respective governments. They want to be seen as just supporting people on the ground there, but the counter-terrorism law, they're afraid that once they go back home, they will be punished, because the aid that is channeled through here in Somalia might eventually land in the hands of the militant group Al-Shabaab. So the fear is quite sticking out there among aid agencies, and they want a clear interpretation of that law so that they don't find themselves caught up between a rock and a hard place, Beatrice.
So, Abdulaziz, just how are aid agencies then supposed to operate without violating the counter-terrorism laws of the UK and US?
Well, the British ambassador here in Mogadishu told some section of the British media, and he was quoted in The Guardian. He was saying that there's no aid agency yet that has been punished for working here in Somalia or supporting in averting a possible famine here in Somalia, saying that they've not yet tackled and they've not yet rather dealt with that situation so far. So they're encouraging more Western-based NGOs to venture here in Somalia and assist the Mogadishu government here and assist the UN in its effort of alleviating the famine. They don't want a repeat of the 2011 scenario here, where more than 250,000 lives were lost. So they're advocating for increased aid assistance here in Somalia, but the fear is quite clear within the Western-based organizations here. They are afraid that if they are seen supporting the victims there in drought-controlled areas under the Al-Shabaab, they might fall a victim to the counter-terrorism laws in their respective governments. So the British ambassador there was quite clear, is that the government in the UK is supporting the aid agencies, is supporting the government in its efforts here of alleviating famine, but then again they want a clear interpretation of that law so that they're not prosecuted.
So what will be the likely impact, though, of humanitarian organizations if they do intend to scale down their work for fear of prosecution under the counter-terror laws?
Well, Beatrice, we're talking about 6.2 million people. That's more than half of Somalia's total population in need. We're talking about more than 350,000 children who are malnourished. We're talking about 500,000 people who have been forced to move from their original inhabitants, from their original homes, to urban centers in search of food. So in these urban centers, it's where the government and Western-backed organizations and the UN that have been left to deal with these cases. So in the likelihood of this counter-terrorism operation to be enforced on Western agencies, and the aid will go down, and definitely it will spike the humanitarian disaster here in Somalia. We are talking about 250,000 people who lost their lives in 2011. So the UN experts here and the Ministry of Disaster Management is of the view that if the aid that is being channeled here to Somalia through Western organization goes down, then definitely it will deal a major blow, and quite a number of people will die as a result of this. And the bulk of the work has been left to the UN, who are in charge of dealing with the remote cases, and also to go by plane to Al-Shabaab controlled to areas blockaded by Al-Shabaab rather, and also to give aid there. So it's a big challenge for the government here, and big challenge for Western NGOs if at all this counter-terrorism operation is likely to affect the drought.
Right, Abdulaziz Billow there joining us on that situation in Somalia, joining us from Mogadishu.